Who are the Space Wolves Bloodclaws? We're going to answer that question, and we're going to have a look at how they play out on the tabletop as well. This is my mini Grimdark. Welcome to our video. Space Wolves diverge from the Codex Astartes in a number of ways, and one of these is the Bloodclaws, where their loyalist brothers will generally have a distinct scout company to train new recruits. Freshly recruited Space Wolves will serve as Bloodclaws instead, boldly hurtling themselves at the enemy, untampered by experience. Space Wolves believe that training is a poor substitute for battlefield experience, and the Bloodclaws will rarely be discouraged from taking up position in the vanguard. Many Bloodclaws will inevitably die in their belligerence, often finding themselves charging headlong into an elite foe or enemy fire with disastrous results. Those that survive, though, will learn from the deaths of their kin and earn their place in the company's ranks as Grey Hunters. The appearance of the Bloodclaw unit can be distinguished by the yellow and red pack markings. These are generally simple geometric patterns, but they sometimes take the variations of Wolfclaw icons to distinguish them from the rest of the army. A couple of interesting notes about Bloodclaw lore. Firstly, Space Wolves do retain scout units. Rather than fledgling new recruits, these units are generally made up of young recruits said to show the signs of the Great Lone Wolf. Individuals happier roaming the tundra alone, stalking prey for days on end, spurred by the promise of the kill. As a result, in the lore anyway, Space Wolf scouts may have served as Bloodclaws, even Grey Hunters, prior to recruitment into the scout unit. Additionally, 10th edition Space Wolves Codex goes out of its way to mention both Swift Claws and Sky Claws. These are bike mounted and jump pack blood claws, respectively. While there are currently no models or rules for these units in the Games Workshop range, it is tantalizing to think that these might feature in the future. Potential releases for 11th edition Space Wolves, maybe. On the tabletop, the Bloodclaw datasheet on the surface has more akin with the Space Marine Assault Intercessors than Scouts. Toughness 4, 3 plus save, 2 wounds, 6 plus leadership, and OC 2, all pretty standard Marine stats. Bloodclaws are a little quicker, perhaps a reflection of the determination to meet the foe, with movement 7 of their Intercessors 6. Bloodclaws only have a small loadout option, with the unit being armed with bolt pistols for a 12-inch, strength 4, damage 1, and AP 0 single attacks. The Bloodclaw pack leader can swap theirs out for a plasma pistol with the familiar 12-inch, strength 7, AP-2 and damage 1, or strength 8, AP-3, damage 2 with hazardous profiles. A little more punch. You'll probably want this since there's no extra cost in 10th edition. Bloodclaws are then armed with Astartes chainswords. It gives them 4 attacks each, hitting on 3 plus, strength 4, AP-1 and damage 1. The pack leader can trade theirs for a power weapon for an extra point of strength and AP. Again, this is free of charge in 10th edition, so you'll want to take this. It's worth noting, although the build options within the box itself include a power axe, power sword, and lightning claw option for the pack leader, these all have exactly the same profile, so in 10th edition at least, they're purely aesthetic. The power claw looks pretty awesome, though, and very on brand for Space Wolves. They have the faction keyword Oath of Moment and the Berserk charge ability. This allows them to advance and charge in the same turn. Combined with their 7-inch move, that gives them a decent threat range on foot and a good chance to get where they want to be and into combat before their numbers are depleted too much by enemy fire. They also have keywords for Iptas Astartes and Space Wolves, probably as you'd expect. And they have the keywords for infantry, battle line, grenades, Imperium, Tacticus, and Bloodclaws. In terms of unit composition, you get 1 Bloodclaw pack leader and 9 to 19 Bloodclaws. On one hand, there's no option to field these in units of 5. That said, being able to put out up to 80 attacks at melee hitting on 3 plus, it's pretty impressive when you apply buffs. We'll talk about leader options for buffing and synergy within detachments in a moment. This again will likely sway your decision on whether to take 10 or 20-man squads. At the time of recording this, the point cost for a 10-man Bloodclaw unit is 135 points, where a 20-strong unit is 270 points. For comparison, 10 Assault Intercessors will set you back 150 points. This seems like a fair differential, with the Assault Intercessors loadout options and their ability to re-roll wound rolls of 1 and re-roll all wounds when near objectives being a really strong native ability. As long as Bloodclaws stay in this region, they'll make it into my Space Wolves list as a solid and fast moving unit to gum up the board, contest objectives, and tear apart most light units with a flurry of chainsword attacks. Having had just a handful of games with them in 10-man and 20-man squads, I think the 10-man makes most sense in most situations, but the 20-man squad did prove effective for charging enemy objectives and for scoring. They also surprised a few enemies when they were led by Ragnar Blackmane, but we'll come to that in a little bit. I honestly don't think there's a wrong answer here. It'll be determined ultimately by your style of play as well as the detachment that you're playing. This unit isn't going to win you the game by leaving a destructive arc across the battlefield. They have a perfectly capable stat line for their points cost, and they'll put out a lot of attacks that will probably pull lighter infantry units apart. They won't go toe to toe with enemy elites, though, not without support characters' buffs or blind luck. Again, though, even if the squad is depleted, you're still likely going to put out a lot of attacks. And with OC2, Toughness 4, 2 wounds, a 3 plus save, it means that a unit of Bloodclaws are pretty well positioned for advancing and charging units on objectives to contest and take away points. They're also cheap enough by Space Marine standards to screen, but you'll find even a 20-man squad will go down surprisingly fast to damage 2 ranged attacks. In terms of leaders, the Bloodclaws have a really decent selection, and it'll really depend on how you intend to use them as to who is going to work best. Just remember, though, adding leaders to the unit increases the unit's overall value in trade off battles. So, whilst it might be tempting to pop Ragnar Blackmane into a unit of Bloodclaws, if you're going to swarm forward to take objectives from the opposition chaff early, which generally feels like the most suited role for Bloodclaws, you could be hanging an expensive epic hero out to dry for countercharges or blasting off the battlefield when guns turn on the unit, and those Bloodclaws will fold like paper. Let's start with the 3 standard character choices, and firstly, the peculiar one. Bloodclaws can be led by the Iron Priest for just 60 points. Don't do this. Whilst the Iron Priest profile is fine, you could argue that the Hellfrost pistol does bring some firepower to the unit. His abilities are tailored to supporting vehicles, and your Bloodclaws are probably going to be charging headlong to their deaths ahead of your main battle line, not hanging out with the Dreadnoughts. Simply, you won't get the benefit of the Iron Priest by sticking him in this unit. His firstborn model will also look a little bit sad alongside all of those Primaris scale new recruits as well. Next, a much more tempting consideration at only 65 points, and one that I've had some early joy with, the Wolfguard Battle Leader. The Tempered Ferocity gives the unit sustained 1. With 4 attacks each in melee, you're fishing for those sustained hits to increase your output. This is going to help them against tougher infantry. I popped a Thunderhammer and Shield Wolfguard Battle Leader in a big squad of 20 for the fun, and they did some solid work against an unsuspecting Tyranid horde. As well as being able to bring 5 strength, 8 attacks to the party, the Battle Leader with Shield has 6 wounds, a 4 plus invulnerable save, and with their Heroic Last Stand ability, they can fight on death on a 2 plus. This unit charged down and stole an objective, and it took a disproportionate amount of effort to remove them. And then we have the Wolf Priest. Aside from being an absolutely awesome miniature, the Wolf Priest is an interesting leader for the Bloodclaws unit. Time of writing, the 70 points. For that, you'll get a decent profile. The shooting isn't going to win them any accolades, but 5 attacks at strength 6, hitting on 2 plus and a 2 damage, is going to complement the Bloodclaws' output nicely in melee. The buffs they bring are strong, all in all. Firstly, the Healing Balm's ability allows you to return a slain model to the unit in the command phase. It's fine. It isn't as impactful as it would be if he was leading head takers, but it's going to be situationally annoying for your opponent. Now, Litany of Hate. This is interesting for Bloodclaws. Whilst being led by a Wolf Priest, the Bloodclaws get +1 to wound. That will make a difference. +1 to wound suddenly makes those mass 4 attacks, each hitting on 3s, much more interesting. You're still going to lose out to elites, but with their ability to get in fast and hopefully secure the charge, Bloodclaws can clean up medium infantry. Of the epic heroes that can lead Bloodclaws, you have 3 choices. 90 points for Ragnar Blackmane, 70 points for Ulrik the Slayer, and Njal Stormcaller at 85 points. Starting with Ulrik and the cheapest option, you essentially get a Wolf Priest profile. Looking harder at the datasheet, you'll see some really value for money buffs that can allow the Bloodclaws to punch up. Firstly, his anti-vehicle and anti-monster 4 plus makes him a little scarier for any big bads that should come looking for an easy meal. He's not going to one-shot any medium to large big bads, mind you. This does combine nicely with his abilities, though, which can be strong situationally. He gives +1 to hit for the unit full stop, which is obviously nice. Slayer's Oath allows you to choose either character, monster, or vehicle keywords at the start of the battle, and if Ulrik's unit fights them in melee, they get +1 to hit and +1 to wound. That's pretty strong on paper, but your Blood Claws will still be hampered by a lack of damage output and AP, and they're unlikely to be the unit going searching for characters, monsters, and vehicles, because they're battles they won't tend to win, even with this buff. Ulrik's a great leader in general, but arguably just a good one for Blood Claws. Niall Stormcaller is back in Power Armor for 10th edition, and this means he can lead Blood Claws. He brings strong, if variable, ranged attacks with his Living Lightning. The Living Lightning then combines with his ability Tempest Wrath, which means one unit he shot and hit with a ranged attack has their own ranged attacks reduced by 6 inches to a minimum of 12 inches. This might be impactful situationally, but it's not likely to be game changing. Niall's other ability, Windwalker, is great for Blood Claws. Automatic 6-inch advance. He also gives Assault to all of the Blood Claws as range attacks for what that's worth. The decision with Niall leading Blood Claws isn't if he's good, it's whether he's going to be more impactful somewhere else. I think Grey Hunters might be where it's at for Niall, head takers, if they aren't already occupied. And that brings us to Ragnar Blackmane. Appropriately given his lore, he's excellent for 90 points and worth the investment for Blood Claws. He's a blender himself with 8 strength 6 attacks, hitting on 2+ with AP -2 and damage 2. He gets 2 extra attacks on the charge. His unit get a buff too. For Blood Claws, that means full rerolls to the wound roll. That's perfect for this unit, and again, this will help them punch up against tougher foes. Of the three, partly because it's thematic, and also because he brings what Blood Claws want in damage output, Ragnar would be the epic hero of choice for me. I particularly like the idea of Ragnar leading a big block of 20 Blood Claws. That's a whole load of attacks to get wound rerolls, and him being in the unit will make counter chargers think twice about grabbing back that objective. For me, of all these choices, 2 stand out as being the most interesting from the standard characters and 1 from the epic heroes. But this will, of course, depend on a number of contextual factors. Of the epic heroes, I think Ulrik and Jarl are better placed somewhere else in the army, so Ragnar makes most sense. I feel like he's also the one you want charging headlong in front of the rest of your force to delete the opposition vanguard and fast attack units, as well as being a nice thematic fit for those that like the fluff. Of the characters, I'd actually go with the Wolfguard Battle Leader, although the Wolf Priest is definitely a viable option. The Battle Leader's durability, as well as his ability to buff the unit where they want to be buffed, makes them more of a threat whilst not breaking the bank for a unit that could get wiped out in one go if the opponent can target them with some strong firepower or an elite melee unit. I definitely argue restraint on adding leaders to your Blood Claws, measuring it against the rest of your army, since these units are likely to be exchange units for you. 10 Blood Claws at 135 points is easy to get value from. Even if they just get you secondaries for a turn before being destroyed, you could argue they did their bit. Once you add a character, and they're 200 points plus, you suddenly need them to do more to be worth the upgrade. They are capable, but when it comes to pure damage output, other units are probably going to be stronger and more appropriate for that task. In terms of army synergy, there are a few things to consider, but ultimately the role the Blood Claws is likely going to be playing is pretty straightforward, but it's not unimportant. Firstly, along with Grey Hunters and standard Astartes options, Blood Claws are a solid secondary unit. They can cover the board in good time on foot, but you could bung them into a transport too. They're cheap enough that you can sacrifice them onto an objective for the points and force your opponent to blast them off or charge them off. The latter is particularly useful as it's going to open up the means for countercharging with another Space Wolves unit back onto the objective. Another thing to consider is that with leadership buffs in particular, Blood Claws can actually be an excellent means to accomplish some of your sagas as well. Let's take a look at each of the individual Space Wolves' detachments and sagas with this in mind. Firstly, and to give up the goose, Blood Claws are excellent for Pax Quarry in Saga of the Hunter. Taking multiple units of 10, you can basically buddy up to ensure that you have the opportunity to double up on your opponent in melee and give you that +1 to hit. Once you complete the saga, which should be quite achievable without any special effort, that becomes +1 to wound as well. Stratagem wise, territorial advantage for 1 CP is really useful. Your large OC2 unit will leave a decent footprint for the enemy to have to overcome. And you'll already be trying to tag team the enemy in melee for the saga, so overwhelming onslaught can give the Blood Claws a bit more survivability with that -1 to hit for a CP. Situationally useful. For Bloodclaws to be relevant in Saga of the Bold, you'll need a character to lead them. Ragnar or a battle leader will give some extra punch and let them take advantage of rerolls to hit or wound. This becomes hit and wound when the saga is completed, and this is on top of native buffs. Ragnar too is a great choice to help the unit contribute. The inspiring presence stratagem gives lethal hits for a CP, great for punching up. Champion's guidance for a better hit ratio if you're tackling a horde of softer meat. Countercharge is costly at 2 CP, but it could situationally be useful for throwing a Bloodclaws unit into the fray and disrupting the enemy's plans. Keep in mind, you won't count as having charged, rules as written, so if you're jumping on a capable unit, this could be a suicide move. Still situationally useful though. Theoretically, Bloodclaws should benefit from lethal hits in Saga of the Beastslayer. In practice, their lack of AP and damage output does limit their initial benefit when targeting vehicles, monsters, and characters, but lethal hits certainly helps. That said, once the saga is completed, and this saga is very achievable, this opens them up for lethal hits against all enemy units, and that makes them scary against enemy infantry. And the models themselves. Refreshed mid 2025, the Bloodclaws look thematic and dynamic. The kit's relatively enjoyable and rewarding to assemble, and whilst they have a bit more detail than your standard Space Marines, they're pretty straightforward to paint up. All in all, I think Games Workshop have done a great job in matching the lore to the models in the datasheets for Bloodclaws. I think they're well balanced around other Space Wolves units. They're interesting enough to be impactful in most games, but measured so that if you get ahead of yourself and throw them into the pair of Hive Tyrants, they will almost certainly get butchered. Arguably still thematic, but not the best use of the unit in most games, I imagine. If this video has been useful, like and subscribe to show your support. If you've got your own takes on the Bloodclaws, share them in the comments, particularly if you've got some lore points I didn't cover or some in-game considerations others might benefit from. Thank you, and keep hobbying.